Okay, it is 7:02. I think we can get started because the latecomers aren't here to see me. They're here to see Dennis. So I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm Nicole Dabby. I'm the Membership and Programs Director here at the Saratoga Springs Preservation Foundation. We have had a very exciting year. This year is our 45th anniversary. So it's been a busy year, but a wonderful year of celebration. And we've had a lot of accomplishments, and hopefully some of you were able to join us for our annual meeting that we held last Thursday. And as many of you know, we have been hosting a Katrina Trask series, so we're excited for tonight's program. I do want to quickly remind you all that if you are not a current member of the foundation, we are a membership-based organization. So we would love to have your annual support that way. It's a great way to be involved. You get discounts to ticketed events. You get to learn what we're up to and our e-blasts. And it's just a really nice way to show your support throughout the whole year, in addition to coming to programs like this. So thank you all again for coming tonight. I just wanted to do that really quick introduction because I actually want to introduce Jackie Bungie, who is our events and programs coordinator, and I'm actually going to let her take over for the rest of the night. I will just be here in case there's any technical difficulties, which we know can always happen with Zoom. So we unfortunately are not able to go live to Facebook tonight. For some reason that is not working, but you have us here, which is perfect. So I will pass it over to Jackie, who will talk some more about our programs and introduce our speaker tonight.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to welcome you to our program tonight for Holy Hill, the Katrina Trask Memorial at Yado, presented by Dennis Montagna. And first, I wanted just to talk about a few exciting programs and some giveaways we have coming up. So one thing I wanted to talk about first was, thanks to the support of Jiang Original Jewelry, the foundation will host a giveaway of the Spirit of Life 14-karat gold pendant and necklace in celebration of Katrina Trask. And the giveaway will be promoted throughout the 2022 Katrina Trask Education Series. And tonight's program is part of that. The giveaway takes place, it started between August 1st and it will end on Giving Tuesday, November 29th. Anyone who donates $50 or more to the foundation will be entered for a chance to win. So it's really exciting. I hope some of you will consider a donation, or if you are not a member, as Nicole had mentioned, you will consider becoming a member, and with just joining all the great work we do here at the foundation. And just one upcoming program I wanted to spotlight tonight, one of our special programs. On Saturday, October 8th at 10:30 a.m., Linda Harvey will be doing a bike tour of National Historic Landmark Saratoga Spot State Park. This is a really fun event. It's open to anyone. It's approximately 3 hours and space is limited. So please reserve now. To reserve your spot, it's limited to 20. Tickets are $25 for members and $30 for non-members. And so just let us know if you'd be interested in participating, and I'm sure Linda would love to have you on October 8th. And then I just wanted to give a brief introduction to our speaker this evening. Dennis Montagna directs the National Park Service's Monument Research and Preservation Program. Based in Philadelphia at the Park Service's Northeast Region Office, and the program provides comprehensive assistance in the interpretation and care of historic cemeteries, outdoor sculpture, and public monuments to managers of national park sites and to other constituents nationwide. He writes and lectures on commemoration and burial spaces with a particular interest in those found outside of traditional cemetery environments, and has assisted historic cemeteries with a wide range of conservation projects. Dennis holds a master's in art history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a PhD from the University of Delaware. He presently serves as the president of the Association for Gravestone Studies and on the Vermont Marble Museum's Board of Directors. And with no further delay, Dennis, if you would share your screen, and we'd love to start the program.
Great. Okay, are we there? See it? Great. Okay, so that should be the lead slide. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, and I want to thank Nicole and Jackie and the Preservation Foundation, Saratoga Springs Preservation Foundation, for inviting me. I was really thrilled, actually, because it's to be able to share my research with people who really know the resource and and understand the context of it. I think is really exciting. Although I think probably some of the things I'll be showing you are going to be familiar, but other things not. The burial site is not a part of Yado that most people know. It's a part of the estate that the artists in residence have access to, but typically not the public. So all the more reason I think I'm really excited about being able to present on it and to show you the research that I've carried out over the last few years on it. I'm going to be presenting it as a paper because I find that's the best way that I can control myself time-wise, and also to make sure that I don't forget to tell you things. I have reached the point in my life where I do indeed forget things that I want to tell people. So I thought this was really probably the best way to make sure that I can cover all the bases. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll be I guess taking comments and questions in the chat, and then the chat will be monitored, and then we'll have a chance to be having more of a conversation and a Q&A afterwards. So think about the kind of things that you might want to ask as we're going through. Okay. Great.
Dennis, can I
Yes.
stop you for one quick second?
Sure.
We can see your presenter view. Would you mind sharing full screen, because I know how amazing your photos are?
Oh, let me see. Right. So what you're seeing is the small version, right?
Yes, where we can
Okay.
see that and the next slide. So if you don't mind
Alright.
sharing the full view.
Let me see if
I
I
was
can.
lucky to get a little sneak peek yesterday, so I
Yeah.
know it's a good one.
All right. Let me see how to.
You may have to stop sharing your screen and then
All
share
right.
and
Stop
choose
sharing
the
it.
correct one.
All
Yes.
right. Let me stop sharing. And then this is the same one that we had before. Right. Hold on a second. Let's see. Right, let's see. Let's do.
This is what I meant by I get to be tech support.
Yeah,
Just the
it's
woman behind the screen.
it's so valuable. All right, let me see if I can. Let me see if just. Let me try this one and see if this one works.
Perfect.
Is that it? Now let me see if I can advance it. Yeah, see if that's not the
The
version
true
that's it.
test.
Yeah, that's all right. Let me. I'm going to unshare again. Let me see. So
Okay,
you're
that one advanced. Yes.
that one. So you are seeing it now advancing. Okay.
Yes, and full screen. That's
And
beautiful. Thank you.
perfect. Rock and roll. We're
Thank you.
there.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, terrific. All right, so you should be seeing like the first slide past the. Okay, great. Okay, all right. In the spring of 1923, a small group of Katrina Trask's friends assembled to dedicate the memorial that marks her grave on the grounds of Yado, her estate in Saratoga Springs. Her cremated remains had been buried at the site soon after her death, early the previous year. She's remembered with a tall Celtic cross, designed and carved in granite by the New York City-based Presby Leland Company, a prominent monument and mausoleum firm. Covering her grave is a flat ledger stone that supports an ornamental relief sculpture cast in bronze. Her name, surrounded by a laurel wreath, forms the memorial's only text. But the story of her burial and memorialization at Yado begins with another burial more than a decade earlier. Katrina's husband, Spencer Trask, financier, venture capitalist, and philanthropist, journeyed down the Hudson by train from Saratoga Springs bound for New York City on the last morning of 1909. He was on his way to argue against the commercial exploitation of the famed mineral springs. At Croton-on-Hudson, a fast-moving freight train crushed his private car while he dressed for the day. He was killed instantly and was the crash's only fatality. His cremated remains were buried at the Trasks family lot at Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery. All four of his children were already interred there. The last of them had died nearly 20 years earlier. None of them had lived beyond the age of 12. Spencer Trask's death was yet one more of the many tragedies visited upon Katrina. But well before his death, the couple had begun to channel their grief over the loss of their children into a philanthropic effort. By 1900, they had formed a corporation and set the gears into motion to turn their sprawling estate, now nestled between the Saratoga Racecourse and the New York Thruway, into a place where painters, sculptors, writers, and composers could come to create during visits of weeks or months. The Trasks had purchased Yado as a summer home in 1881, not long after the death of their 5-year-old son, Alan. From the beginning, the estate served as a place of respite, not only for the Trasks, but also for their friends in the worlds of business, art, and literature. The Trasks and their guests often wrote and performed elaborate costume plays on themes drawn from the classical, medieval, and the colonial American past. These events at Yado seem to have begun with the Halloween coronation of Katrina Trask as Queen of Yado in 1882, seen in the photo at the upper right. And that little label that you see at the left is what's written on the back of that particular photo. Coronation ceremony, Yado, Saratoga, and then a date. Throughout the decade that followed Spencer's death, Katrina continued planning the institution with the help of a team of friends and colleagues. Yado received its first group of artists in residence in 1926, 4 years after Katrina's passing. Nearly a century later, it continues to serve the mission that the Trasks had designed. The list of writers, visual artists, and composers who are Yado alums is a long and impressive one. Aaron Copland came several times, beginning in 1930. He resided in the estate's stone tower and wrote his piano variations there. He later launched the Yado Festival of Contemporary Music, which ran for 20 years. Eudora Welty completed A Curtain of Green, her first collection of short stories, while in residence there in 1940. Catherine Ann Porter was there at the same time and would write the introduction to Welty's collection. A very young Truman Capote wrote much of his first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms at Yado, during his stay in 1946. A photo that accompanied a Life magazine article that year shows Capote at the typewriter in what had been Katrina's study. The list of Yado alums also includes painters Clifford Still and Helen Frankenthaler, novelists James Baldwin, Philip Roth, and Mario Puzo, and poet Sylvia Plath. Because of its impact upon American culture, the Secretary of the Interior, through the National Park Service, designated Yado a National Historic Landmark in 2013. But let's return to Katrina Trask's passing in 1922. Instead of joining her husband and children at Greenwood Cemetery, Katrina's ashes are interred on the wooded knoll that she selected to serve as her burial site. It is approached through an alley of pine trees that ends with a curve to the right as it leads up to a small clearing. Between 1922 and 1977, Katrina's grave would be joined by those of the 4 colleagues who helped to make Yado a reality and guided the institution through its first half century. All of their graves are marked by modest granite markers that carry bronze plaques ornamented with floral motifs. Spencer Trask is there in spirit, if not in fact. A small granite and bronze cenotaph in his memory was placed in the early 1930s. Sculpted pine boughs frame his name and the simple epitaph, "Guardian Spirit, ever here." George Foster Peabody was Spencer Trask's business partner and lifelong friend. He retired at 55 and spent the last 30 years of his life advocating for progressive causes, among them free trade, women's suffrage, and African-American education. He was a big contributor to the University of Georgia, the institution that since 1941 has honored him by bestowing the Communications Media Award that bears his name. He married the widowed Katrina Trask during the last year of her life, took up residency at Yado, and helped to prepare the estate for its future use as an artist retreat. He died in 1938 and joined his wife in the burial ground she had created. His memorial features oak leaves, acorns, and the inscription, "Ever close friend." Another photo from that 1946 Life magazine piece depicted the cemetery with the memorials to Katrina and her two husbands in place, Peabody to the right of her and Spencer Trask to the left. Marjorie Peabody Waite assisted George Foster Peabody with many of his civic and philanthropic efforts, Yado among them. She became his adopted daughter in 1926 and later served as the executor of his estate. In 1933, she published Yado, Yesterday and Today, a succinct history and guidebook aimed at an audience of resident artists and visitors to the grounds. She died in December of 1944 and became the third burial at Yado. On her marker, her name is backed by sprigs of what seemed to be phlox. Alina Gilbert Pardee came to Yado in 1887 as governess to the Trask children, Christina and Spencer Jr. When the children died a year later from the diphtheria they had contracted from their mother, Pardee remained as her assistant and confidant. She died in 1947 after 60 years at Yado. Her stone is adorned with flowering clover and the epitaph, "Ever in the Circle." More than just being in the circle, her grave marker is placed on axis with Katrina's ledger stone and the Celtic cross. Elizabeth Knappen Ames was Marjorie Peabody Waite's sister. Widowed by the First World War, the 37-year-old Ames came to Yado to visit her sister in 1923. She was hired to catalog the Trasks' art collection and a year later became Yado's first executive director. She spent the next 45 years at the helm of the institution, retiring in 1969. In the will she drafted the year before her retirement, her first order of business was her burial and the marking of her grave. She instructed her executor to have her remains cremated as soon as possible and buried across from her sister's grave. She wrote in her will, "The stone is stored in the Yado workshop, and a plaque to be attached to it is in the closet off the office garage. My name on the wrapping," end quote. She died 9 years later in 1977. Her burial became the last at Yado. A photo taken of Ames' marker in 1978 at the top right, the year after her death, suggests that its foundry had given it a pale green patina so that it would harmonize with the bronze plaques already in place. Katrina Trask's decision to be buried at Yado came during the last years of her life. In 1918, she had moved from her mansion into a smaller house on the property that she had enlarged in 1916. You see the photographs at the top, the black and white before it had been enlarged, and then the color photo on the right after. You can see the addition there on the right-hand side. Then the map shows the relationship between the big house where she had lived, that you see in the black and white photo at the bottom right, over to where that smaller house is. Her new smaller house was given the name Mansal Asada, Arabic for House of Happiness, by Syrian Archbishop Germanos. Germanos had befriended Katrina in 1915 when he came to the United States to raise funds for the network of cooperative farms he had created in his homeland. He also named the knoll that would become Katrina Trask's burial site a few years later. He called it Tel al-Muqaddas, Holy Hill. Both he and Katrina were convinced that nature carried spiritual power, and they shared the belief that this elevated knoll was a sanctuary and a retreat for rest and peace. In 1921, Katrina announced to Elena Pardee that she wanted to be buried there and invited both her and George Peabody to be buried there as well. As the executors of Katrina's estate, Pardee and Peabody began developing her burial site in the spring of 1922, a few months after her ashes had been interred there. Their planting of trees and flower borders was followed by the arrival of her grave memorial and fresh sod a year later. And you can see in the black and white photograph the brand new memorial with newly planted trees behind it. It seems likely that the alley of trees that leads to the gravesite was established at this time as well. It begins at the house in which Katrina spent her last years and in which George Peabody continued to reside after her death. The porch off her second-floor bedroom looks directly down the alley, and this is the kind of landscape manipulation with memorial intent that Katrina, Peabody, and Pardee would have embraced. But if we look more closely at the memorial landscape created at Holy Hill, we will see that it was part of a much larger commemorative program that Katrina and Spencer conceived, and that this was an effort that would ultimately extend beyond the boundaries of Yado to encompass Saratoga Springs as well. Preserved within Yado's records, now housed at the New York Public Library, is a letter from Presby Leland to Peabody and Pardee as the design of Katrina's grave memorial took shape in 1922. It notes that the cross they would produce would have a fine historic pedigree. It would be based upon St. Martin's Cross, erected in the 9th century on the island of Iona off the coast of Scotland. It has stood in its original location for more than 1,200 years in what is considered the birthplace of Celtic Christianity. With the letter, they included a reference photo that shows a similar Celtic cross they had produced for an earlier client. Retouched to excise the other cemetery monuments in the background, the cross's setting looks much like the one at Yado, and they both closely resemble St. Martin's cross, right down to the cross's ornamental motif and the softly rounded three-step base that supports it. As noted earlier, the ornamented Celtic cross provides the site's primary vertical element, but it carries no inscription. Katrina's ledger stone, adorned with her name and a bronze relief, completes the memorial by identifying her, but absent is any information about her. The bronze relief on her ledger stone is the work of little-known sculptor Alex J. Edel. He was only 23 when he received the commission to create Katrina's bronze. Over the years, he would sculpt the bronzes for all 6 of the markers on Holy Hill. His memorial to Katrina Trask features an elaborate, intricate tangle of roses. As noted earlier, her name is encircled by a laurel wreath. The laurel is a fairly universal symbol of victory, honor, and eternal glory, but the rose bore a special, more personal meaning to Katrina and Spencer Trask. In 1917 and 1918, a few years before her death, Katrina wrote a manuscript she called The Story of Yado, and she asked Elena Pardee to publish it privately after her passing. Chapter 10 is entitled The Pine and the Rose. Here, Katrina explained that she and her husband assumed these two motifs as their personal emblems. She described their attributes, extending their meaning to Yado and its future mission as a haven for people who create art. She wrote, "The pine, what did the pine mean? Steadfastness, staunchness, protection for the weary, refreshing shadow in the heat, safe shelter in the storm, constant giving of help. The rose, what did the rose mean? A glowing heart of love, fragrance, the lavish outpouring of self. For these two things, Yado should stand forever." She goes on to say, "I added the pine and the rose to the household decorations. In my room, always there is a vase holding a spray of fresh pine with a rose nestling in the feathery plumes. At every festival and function, there are great jars of pine branches and roses." Katrina ends this essay with a recollection of her reading of Faust that provides added insight into the thought behind her grave memorial. She wrote, quote, "As Faust's body lies upon the ground, the spirits cover it with balsam and with roses, dropping them from above, while the choir of angels sing, 'Roses, ye glowing ones, balsam bestowing ones, Yado, glowing and bestowing, God grant it," end quote. Understanding Katrina's burial site at Yado provides insight into the appearance of Spencer Trask's grave memorial at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. The family obelisk that carries his name and the names of the 4 children who predeceased him. It also carries a blank space that had been reserved for Katrina's name. In fact, preserving a space for Katrina's name beneath his own required that the family inscribe the name of their 4th child on the base of the monument instead of on the die stone with the others. His burial is also marked by a ledger stone covered by a bronze plaque, very much in keeping with the one atop Katrina's grave at Yado. His is covered with a tangle of pine boughs interspersed with roses. Katrina's ledger is likely similar to the one she would have had she been buried with the rest of her family. Cemetery records at Greenwood suggest that Spencer's ledger stone was placed in 1911, and it was placed in a way that would allow space for Katrina's ledger to be installed beside it, but it never was. Katrina Trask's decision to be interred and memorialized on the grounds of Yado and not at Greenwood can be seen as part of a much larger effort to leave a lasting memory of the Trask family for the generations of artists that she hoped would come to Yado to live and to be inspired to create art, literature, and music. Once she and Spencer had settled upon their plan for the estate's future, they began to craft a landscape designed to inspire those who would experience it, both the artists who would come to work there and the general public that would be granted access to parts of the grounds. In 1899, a decade before his death, Spencer Trask placed a glazed terracotta entrance portico across the gently curving path that led from the mansion. And you can see in the aerial photograph where the mansion is, and there's that expanse of lawn. And then there's a little path that goes along to the side. And then where the star is where that gate. And I'm showing you photographs of it taken a couple of years ago on the right. And then the one on the left is when that portico was pretty much new at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1899, a decade before his death, Spencer Trask places his glazed terracotta portico. When it was built, it framed long vistas to distant hills, now obscured by a forest that tries in vain to soften the sound of Interstate 87. The portico also provides an elevated view of the former rose garden designed and planted at the same time. All of it he dedicated to Katrina, the Lady of Yado, the Rose of Yado. An embodiment of Spencer Trask stands watch over the rose garden, Off to the side was a huge pine tree, preserved when the rest of the site was cleared and prepared to make way for Katrina's roses. As they redesigned Yaddo's landscape, the Trasks seemed to be most intent upon preserving the idea that the estate's future as an artist retreat is intrinsically tied to the 4 dead children whose inheritance would be passed along to the artists who would come to live and work there. As guests have attested over the years, the presence of the children is palpable. The 4 bodies of water located near the entrance to the estate are named for them. You can see in that that drawn map the lakes: Lake Allen, Lake Christina, Lake Spencer, and Lake Katrina. So it's Christina. So 2 of the children were named after Spencer and Katrina. Eastman Johnson painted posthumous portraits of Christina and Spencer Jr., the 2 children claimed by diphtheria within days of each other in 1889. Katrina combined the names of Christina and Alan when she created Crystallon, the hero of her 35-page epic poem of the same name. Published in 1903, it tells a story of a would-be knight struck down in his youth, but not before he had demonstrated his bravery in the face of great adversity, thus assuring his fame for all time. In 1900, 3 years before she had published Crystallon, the poem's hero became the centerpiece of a formal memorial to the Trask children on Yaddo's grounds. Set on axis with Katrina's rose garden, the memorial was framed by a newly planted grove of pine trees. And you can see that on the map where the little star is. That's where the monument is nestled, and that's Katrina's rose garden, is that oval shape. So it extends on axis with it. Inscribed on the memorial's die block is, "In memory of the children of this house." Their names, Alan, Christina, Spencer, and Katrina, are cut into the other side. Sculptor William Ordway Partridge presented Crystallon at the pivotal moment of his great bravery in the face of danger, seen here with an engraving from Katrina Trask's book that closely matches Partridge's marble. Unarmed, bearing only a handful of flowers, he confronts and disperses his king's would-be assassins with the words, quote, "But God is with me to defend me now, so strike against his power if you dare." The Trask's efforts to create memorials extended beyond the borders of their estate and beyond the family's burial sites in Brooklyn and at Yado. Between 1913 and 1915, Katrina shepherded the creation of the Spencer Trask Memorial Fountain in Saratoga Springs Congress Park. Financed with the settlement money she had received from the freight railroad that had been responsible for her husband's death, the work was the collaborative effort of architect Henry Bacon and sculptor Daniel Chester French. Katrina Trask rejected French's initial conception for the fountain figure, a model of which is on the left, because she felt it was too mournful. The revised version, which came to be called the Spirit of Life, met with her approval. It's an expansive lyrical figure, symbolic pine bough in hand, devoid of sadness. Through it, French captured the celebratory, forward-looking mood that Katrina wanted for her husband's Saratoga Springs memorial. With the passing of Katrina Trask in early 1922, Elena Pardee and George Peabody carried out another memorial project in her honor, also in Saratoga Springs Congress Park. Initiated by staff who had worked for the Trasks at Yado, the Katrina Trask Gateway replaced a wooden stairway that led up from the park to a house that George Foster Peabody had donated to the Katrina Trask Alliance, an organization launched to support working women and women's causes in the city. Designed and constructed concurrently with the cemetery's monuments at Yado, the Gateway project used the same rose-toned Adirondack source granite that Peabody and Pardee believed best represented Katrina's spirit. A book plate designed for the Alliance's library links Congress Park's two memorials to the Trasks and reaffirms the couple's importance to the civic life of Saratoga Springs. Through the landscapes and memorials they created, the Trasks and those who continued their commemorative efforts try to construct an inspirational narrative very much rooted in a 19th century romantic tradition steeped in pageantry, heraldry, and a belief in the power of nature to ennoble and edify. The modes of artistic and literary expression that Yaddo's residents developed in the centuries since Katrina's death have varied greatly from those that the Trasks themselves embraced. But the Trasks and the circle of friends who carried out their plans achieved the couple's major desires: to communicate to later generations what Yaddo had meant to them, and to ensure that the site would be reborn from tragedy to become an incubator for the making of art, music, and literature. The place of rest and sanctuary known as Tel al-Muqaddas enshrines in very simple ways those who created Yaddo and made it a force in American cultural history that continues nearly a century later. The 6 memorials there carry no birth and death dates, only names, floral motifs, and in some case, bits of text that describe not individuals, but only their undying relationship to the rest of the group and to the institution they brought into being. Guardian spirit ever here, ever close friend, ever in the circle. Those buried here are not tethered to a time, but only to Yaddo and to the work that they carried out there. Thank you very much. And I want to also share a few acknowledgements of assistance that I received during the course of the research. The Corporation of Yaddo provided me access to the site that was wonderful and allowed me to really take good images and to get a better feel for it and a better understanding of how the landscape worked. I used the Yaddo records at the New York Public Library, and their research staff was terrific. And then the George Foster Peabody papers at the Library of Congress in DC. And then in Saratoga, terrific assistance from the Saratoga Springs Public Library with their Saratoga collection that had copies of Katrina's very rare books. And then the photo archive at the Saratoga Springs History Museum, and an expert on the sculptor who had worked on it, the Louise Deck from the Sculpture House in Fort Pierce, information about Edel. And then to my friend and colleague Ramara Jewett, who's has done wonderful work in scholarship on her own right, and is a wonderful painter and a Saratoga Springs resident. So I want to offer thanks to everybody who helped me. So thank you very much. And I guess we can go ahead, and if there are questions or comments, I'm happy to entertain them.
Yeah, so Dennis, I'll leave your acknowledgements up for a bit if you could. There was one question that came through. Sally Sheldon sent this question to everyone, but she was wondering if anyone knows where the last 3 children were born and where they died.
Let's see. Well, I think only one of them died. I think only Alan had died, because he died shortly before they came to Yaddo in 1881. And in a sense, Yaddo was a place that would help them deal with Alan's loss. The 2 children who died from diphtheria died at Yaddo. They were already living at Yaddo then. And the last trying to think, the last one was actually named Katrina. And so she was named after Katrina Trask. And I'm not sure about that. I think probably others may know that more, but I'm not quite sure. But I was assuming that would have been a death there as well.
Are there any other questions from anyone? Please type those in the chat box so I can make sure Dennis sees those. While you guys are thinking about that, I also wanted to mention that in partnership with the Saratoga Springs History Museum, the Saratoga Springs Preservation Foundation is going to, we're going to partner on another lecture, Katrina Trask's Saratoga Legacy, and that's going to be held at the Canfield Casino in Congress Park on November 15th at 7 p.m. And that's going to be a lecture by Ramara Jewett with period readings by Tammy Enger and Michael Bellinger. And so I know, Dennis, you just mentioned Ramara, but I wanted to give her a shout out in regards to the lecture she has coming up. And then you can reserve your free tickets beginning October 15th. And that would be at the History Museum's website, and that's www.saratogahistory.org. And I also put this information in the chat box. And so if you click on that, you could see the information again as well.
Shall I stop sharing so we could all sort of see each other better? I can go ahead and do that if you'd like.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna share my screen again
Perfect.
as well.
Okay. Great.
Hey, Jackie, before you start sharing, I just wanted to ask Dennis how he became involved in this. How did you become interested in Katrina Trask and Yado and this
Okay.
whole story?
Sure. Great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I working for the National Park Service, one of the things that we do in the regional office is we work with the National Historic Landmarks program. And so we provide assistance to landmarks, and we also get involved with counseling people who want to become a National Historic Landmark, we give advice on preparing a nomination and that sort of thing. And that's how I first became acquainted with Yado. Is we were asked to help evaluate whether or not we thought they should go after an NHL nomination. The institution had never really been interested in it, but at some point about a decade ago, they expressed interest in exploring National Historic Landmark designation. So I visited the site along with someone from the New York State Preservation Office. So we were toured around, and so while we were there, they had taken us up to see the grave site, and I was struck by it. I thought it was just a really beautiful and a wonderful place, and so I kind of filed it away as like, gee, it'd be nice to do some research on that at some point. So eventually I was able to do it. But I kind of, in talking about memorialization, I kind of feel like I got to participate in that long tradition of memorialization, because one of the things that we do too is when a site becomes a National Historic Landmark, and as I say, this one became one. Yado became one in 2013. One of the things that we do is we work with the landmark, and I write and design the National Historic Landmark plaques. So I was able to write the text and lay it all out, write the text describing. We try to describe it as sort of as succinctly as possible why a National Historic Landmark is a landmark, what's important about it. So I got a chance to actually sort of do a little tiny monument at Yado that was placed. And you saw the photograph that showed the dedication ceremony with Kirsten Gillibrand was there, and we had Park Service attendance as well. So that's how I got interested in it, and then was able to then put a little research project together as a way. We see these as ways in which we can support with research National Historic Landmarks that are part of our system.
And so Dennis, another question just came up. Did Katrina actually live in the house on Broadway overlooking the park, or was it built as a home for women?
It was. My understanding is that it's that Peabody had actually owned that, and that it had been a gift that came from. And Ramara would know that better. She's done quite a bit more research on the house and on that whole gateway project. But my understanding was that was actually put together after Katrina's death, and it wasn't a place she had ever lived. And but it was a house that was given over for that particular person. The gate's still there, the house isn't anymore, but I think it was kind of a remarkable place.
And then I also wanted to point out that Leslie Leduc just responded and said the Trask's second child, Christina, was born in 1877, before the Trask family came to Saratoga Springs.
Okay, but she had died, but she was one of the two who had died there, following that. Okay. And she's depicted, that photograph that I showed of that whole ceremony, that Halloween ceremony. You can see two of the Trask children there. So Alan had died. There were two children who were alive when they moved to Yado in 1881. So yeah.
Great. Any other final questions before we go?
Well, I was going to say, Dennis, you definitely were not over on time. So if there's any other stories that you'd like to share or any other information, it's only 7:45. So you have
Well, I
Plenty of
thought an
time.
hour was a little much. I find, that it's, I try to keep it moving along relatively briskly. And I also find that if I'm listening to something, I tend to start zoning out after about 40 minutes or 45 minutes. So I wanted to sort of keep you all in mind and sort of try to be as succinct as possible. But no, I mean, there's just so much. I mean, there's just so much that research that needs to be done on so many things and so many places that are important that we don't even really think about. And I'm, as I say, really particularly interested in burial sites and in cemeteries and in preservation of those sites. And I think that one of the things that one of the benefits of trying to do research on things is if you can get people to understand the history and the story behind things, you'll get them to value it more, and you'll get them to want to try to take care of it better. Looking back through the images of the Trask burial site, and I kept thinking, ooh, I would love to put a project together to do a cemetery preservation project there, because it really could use that. I mean, it's not an abused place, but it's kind of a neglected place in a way. And if you notice that the ledger stone that had Katrina's name, it's missing a letter. One of the letters went off somewhere, so it's missing. And I think it's the R in Trask. Well, we still have an R from Katrina, so we could take a mold of that. We can create a new bronze R, and so that could actually be restored. The memorial could really use some attention. That the cemetery site could use a little bit of attention. And it'd be really interesting to try to put a preservation project. So it's like I have these two different hats that I'm wearing all the time, and it's I kind of can't take one off without the other. So. But anyway, but it's really quite a one, and I was also very much interested in the fountain of the spirit of life. But I didn't, until I started doing the research, I didn't understand that there was a connection, and that all of these commemorative spaces were tied together, and that they were part of kind of a unified vision. So I think, the more you begin looking at things, you begin to see connections that may not be apparent initially, but then, the more you kind of let the material flow over you, you start to sort of put these pieces together. And it's that way with any kind of research. So, I would encourage all of you to, as you're exploring stories, to try to sort of understand what these things mean, and things that may be, you've seen all your lives. Sometimes taking a fresh look at them makes you see them in a different way.
So another question came in, Dennis. Does Yado ever allow tours to Holy Hill?
Not that I know of, but that's something to really check with them. I mean, my understanding has always been that Holy Hill is really a more private space, and that the artists in residence have access to it. But I think that the public is much more. I mean, I don't know how you would police that, but I think that the public seems to be much more acquainted with the garden, and the Trask had really wanted that to be a public space, the rose garden, the lawn area. And actually, even before I think even before Spencer Trask's death, there were already postcards. There are early 20th century postcards that show the rose garden, show all of these spaces when they were really brand new. So I think that even early on, there was an understanding that these were spaces that the public was going to be interested in coming to see and coming to visit. And then I think the Trasks felt an obligation and a desire to have their property be not only a benefit for artists in the future, but also a benefit for the Saratoga Springs community.
Yeah, and then Sally Sheldon just commented, there are tours actually occurring at Yado this Sunday, but there's no access allowed to Holy Hill.
Okay, yeah, that's my understanding of that as well. But yeah, but I showed you where it is, so you can. I will not advocate you sneaking off and doing it, but I hope I've been able to at least give you an introduction, make you feel like you've actually seen it. But it is quite a wonderful place. But again, until walking the site, I never would have really understood how that array of trees worked, how it tied in with the house, how, that whole sort of thoughtfulness and the sort of the way that space was so really intricately constructed. And it's something that until you actually can sort of walk around that landscape, it's really hard to perceive it.
Yeah, and then Leslie just commented that Sunday's tour is a ticketed event and tickets are available online. I think some of it's already been sold out, but I know a few people that nabbed the early tickets, which I think were cheaper than the afternoon.
Well, I think it's wonderful everything you're doing to really acknowledge the centennial of Katrina's passing. She was clearly a force. She and Spencer were clearly a force there, and I think there's probably a lot more that can and should be explored about them. So anyway, so I would encourage everybody to try to plow into that as much as possible.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Certainly.
Really appreciate it. Nicole, did you have any last words? Any other questions? Anyone else? Last chance.
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Dennis and Jackie. If you don't mind sharing that last
Yes.
slide for us, that would be fantastic. And thank you all for joining us tonight. If anybody ends up having questions after the fact, you can always shoot us an email at the foundation and we can relay those over to Dennis. And we just really enjoyed this interesting program. It was definitely a different perspective that we haven't gotten. So it fit in perfectly with our 3-part series.
Great. Well,
Sorry,
thank you
guys,
again for
having
inviting me. Yeah, thanks again.
Technical difficulties here, but
You want us to edit that? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
we
pretty
wanna edit
much.
that for you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
it's not allowing me to go full screen. But I wanted to thank you all for joining us. And in case any of you are not a member and you want to become a member or donate, please visit us at www.saratogapreservation.org, or you could always call the office at 518-587-5030.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Great. Take care. Have a nice
so
evening.
much.
Thank you,
everybody.
Dennis.
Sure,
Thank you,
you bet.
Dennis.
Take care. Bye-bye now.